In today's video, we'll be walking through the iceberg of retirement spending that most advisors ignore and that can harm your retirement. Over my years operating as a financial planner, I've helped many retirees avoid these silent retirement killers. Here's the thing. Most retirees believe that once they stop working, their expenses will magically drop, making their savings stretch further. But in reality, underestimating your expenditures is one of the most common mistakes, and it's one that can completely derail your retirement plans. That's why I'm making this video today, to help you understand why this hidden challenge catches so many retirees off guard, and more importantly, how to plan around it. Let's get started. Many retirees enter retirement assuming that their expenses will go down dramatically. And sure, some things might change. You're no longer commuting to work, you may have paid off your mortgage, or you might not be saving for retirement anymore. But here's the reality. Most of your normal spending won't change by much. In fact, for many retirees, their first few years of retirement are some of the most expensive. Travel, hobbies, and other activities that were postponed during your working years can quickly add up. And as you age, the cost of long-term care and for out-of-pocket medical expenses can balloon in ways that you might not have anticipated. So why does this challenge exist? The first reason is that your lifestyle remains largely the same. Think about it. The groceries, utilities, and subscriptions that you're paying for today aren't going anywhere just because you've retired. You'll still have to maintain your home, your car, and your insurance coverage. The difference, you're now drawing from your savings to cover these expenses instead of receiving a paycheck. Many pre-retirees that I meet are highly optimistic about their retirement spending expectations. They often anchor on their current expenditures, adjusting only for work-related costs that they believe will disappear. However, they're less likely to account for new expenses that may emerge, like travel, hobbies, or increased healthcare costs. Another common tendency is overconfidence when estimating their discretionary spending cuts. While you might save on commuting or business attire, other costs like dining out or engaging in hobbies can rise, especially in the early, more active years of your retirement. This is why I stress the importance of building a retirement plan that's using reasonable and ideally conservative assumptions. A plan should work because it's grounded in reality, not because it relies on optimistic projections or behavioral changes that may not materialize. By doing so, you create a stronger foundation for long-term financial security. So what's the solution? Start with a realistic budget. How much have you been spending? This is the first place to start. Look at your last few years of tax returns. Start with how much money that you've brought in before taxes. Subtract how much of your paycheck has gone to retirement savings contributions, and then how much you've been paying in taxes. The result is your available net income. From there, if your savings accounts have been gradually rising, you haven't been spending this income, so subtract it from the available net income. And then alternatively, if your savings have been staying flat, then you've been spending what you've been making. From here, if you know that there's absolutely some major costs that will go away when you retire, then adjust your spending assumption, but I would really do so with caution. I've helped so many people plan for retirement and know how easy it is to adjust an assumption to suit a better expected outcome. I really think it's important to be realistic and even err to the conservative end of the spectrum when you're dealing with uncertainties around retirement spending. Retirement budgeting is just the start when it comes to the retirement spending iceberg. There are two core other expenses which can impact your long-term retirement prospects. But before we get into those, if you want to learn more about how we've helped retirees future-proof their retirements with a few simple techniques, I encourage you to book a complimentary one-on-one call with me. I'll help you analyze your situation and develop a plan that ensures that your savings can support your lifestyle for the long haul. Click the first link in the description to get started. But on to the next point. The second reason that this retirement spending iceberg exists is that intermittent costs tend to be out of sight, out of mind. If somebody asks you to create a budget to itemize your expenses today, it can be really easy to miss things that don't typically hit your cash flow on a normal basis. These are often larger, less frequent costs like maintaining your home, replacing a roof, or purchasing a new vehicle. Ignoring these costs can have serious consequences. If you don't plan for them, you're essentially underestimating your retirement risk. What happens when the roof leaks or the furnace gives out unexpectedly? These aren't the kinds of expenses that you can just defer indefinitely. If your plan doesn't account for them, you might find yourself dipping into your portfolio during market downturns or taking on debt at a time when you can least afford it. That's when these things start to spiral. So why are these costs treated differently than everyday expenses? It's because they don't happen regularly, and that makes them easy to overlook when you're budgeting. When we think about our monthly or even our annual expenses, we're usually focused on the predictable recurring costs, groceries, utilities, subscriptions. Those are predictable. But those larger, sporadic expenses often catch people off guard because they aren't a part of your routine, even though they're inevitable over time. Now, some retirees do try to budget for these, but where they often go wrong is relying on emergency funds or treating these costs as one-offs rather than predictable events. They'll think, I'll just cover this from my emergency savings, but then life throws 2 or 3 emergencies in quick succession, like a car repair, a medical expense, and a major home issue, and suddenly their emergency fund is wiped out. Or worse, they'll underfund these accounts altogether because they don't take into account how inflation or aging might increase these costs. The key is to treat these larger, irregular expenses as a part of your overall retirement strategy, not as outliers. This means setting aside specific reserves for things like maintenance and vehicle replacement, not just an all-purpose emergency fund, and being realistic about how much you'll need over the course of your retirement. By planning for these in advance, you avoid the financial strain and emotional stress that comes with scrambling to cover these big-ticket costs unexpectedly. For example, if you spend $20,000 on a new roof, you won't need to replace it again for maybe 20 years. But in 20 years, you're going to need to do it again. So think of all of these random costs needed to maintain your home for the rest of your life. What I do is make an assumption for an annual cost to pay for this lump of money. A good way to estimate this is to take the value of your home and multiply it by somewhere between 1 and 2%, depending on how old your home is and how well you operate a skill saw. The older your home and the less handy you are, the closer to 2%, and vice versa. It's not perfect, but if you don't consider these costs, you're underestimating your future needs and are by definition underestimating your retirement risk or overestimating your retirement readiness. So look, we've covered short-term costs and emergency costs in brief detail here, and I have to move on to the next point now, but if you want to learn more about how to manage these retirement expenses, I'm actually releasing a video on this in a few weeks' time, so click subscribe now so you don't miss it. All right, so on to the next point. The third reason for this retirement spending iceberg is that custodial care is a probability, not a possibility, and it's not cheap. This is a major wild card, but ignoring it sets you up for potential failure. The truth is, the majority of retirees, about 7 in 10, or 70%, will need some form of custodial care during their lifetime. That means it's more likely that you'll need it than you won't. And here's the kicker. The costs for these services are staggering. Care in a facility can easily run $150,000 or more per year, depending on where you live and the level of care that you need. Ignoring this reality is not a sound strategy. So where does this leave retirees who ignore this advice? Simply put, they risk financial ruin. Without a plan, retirees often end up spending down their assets far faster than they anticipated, and this not only jeopardizes their ability to afford care, but also leaves them reliant on the Medicaid program, which only steps in after their financial resources are largely depleted. For those who are married, this can create an even bigger problem. Medicaid may allow the healthy spouse to retain some assets and income, but in many cases, it's simply not enough to support their ongoing needs. Ignoring this issue could leave both spouses in a precarious financial and emotional position. So why do so many retirees bury their heads in the sand when it comes to long-term care? It's human nature. Most people don't want to think about losing their independence or needing help with their basic daily activities. It's uncomfortable to imagine yourself in that situation, so many just avoid it altogether. There's also a sense of optimism bias, this idea that it won't happen to me. And for others, the sheer complexity of planning for long-term care is so overwhelming that it makes it really easy to avoid the topic entirely. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Thankfully, the government won't leave you completely stranded if you need care and can't pay for the services. Medicaid acts as a safety net for those without the resources to cover these costs. But Medicaid doesn't step in until your assets are largely depleted. If you're single and not planning for survivors, this might seem like less of a concern, but even then, relying on Medicaid limits your options. When you're on Medicaid, you don't get to choose where you receive care. You're often placed wherever there's an available bed, which might not align for your preferences for comfort or the location. If you prefer to have the flexibility to pay for a private, more comfortable facility, it's crucial to plan for this possibility. This is especially true if you're married. Medicaid won't provide support until your combined family resources are almost entirely spent down. While the spouse who doesn't need care is allowed to retain some assets, in most cases, it's not nearly enough to sustain them over the long term, especially if care is needed early on. Planning ahead gives you options and protects both you and your loved ones from being caught off guard by these expenses. It's not about expecting the worst, it's about being prepared for a reality that's more common than many people think. So what's the solution? Plan for long-term care. Don't ignore the potential costs of needing long-term care. This doesn't mean that you have to buy long-term care insurance, and if you do want to pursue that option, that's fine too. Just be prepared to pay up for the ongoing cost of this insurance because it will be expensive due to the high likelihood that you'll be needing it. So if you're not going to go with the insurance route, how can you not ignore this potential cost? Well, for starts, you can bake this into your retirement planning efforts. By assuming that your costs will balloon during your later years, you're at least capturing some of this risk when you're calculating how much money that you'll need or whether or not your current savings are sufficient. It's also important to nip the legal end of things in the bud. There are legal strategies that you can take to better protect your assets from this risk. Some of these approaches are pretty aggressive and can require a high level of commitment, but there are things that you can do on the legal end that are very practical and may put you in a better spot should you need custodial care at some point in the future. I really think that it's worth it to meet with an estate planning attorney to discuss these options and at a minimum come up with a game plan to manage this potential risk. One of the most effective ways to ensure that you're not underestimating your expenditures is to stress test your retirement plan. This involves running different scenarios to see how your savings hold up under various conditions, like higher than expected costs or market downturns. When working with my clients, I tend to focus on these scenarios because I really think it's important to understand what can happen. If you know you can safely retire, experience a bad outcome, and not have to go back to work or limit your lifestyle, then that's an informed decision in my book. Now that you know the hidden challenge of underestimating your expenditures in retirement, remember, planning isn't just about saving as much as possible. It's about spending strategically and preparing for the unexpected. If you're ready to feel more confident about your retirement plan, I'd love to help. Click the first link in the description to schedule a complimentary consultation with me, and I'll help you analyze your situation and develop a plan that ensures that your savings can support your lifestyle for the long haul. I'll see you in the next one.